everyone. My name is Kerry O'Shea. I'm going to be taking you through a session called Managing Through Ambiguity today. We're going to be looking at team and people issues that you may encounter, particularly in the current climate. And I'll be sharing some best practices and toolkits that hopefully will be useful for you there. So I'm originally from Ireland. I've been in Asia for almost 30 years. I've been with Google for about 9.5 years. All my background is in human resources. So I've been a recruiter, an HR manager, a trainer. This is my area of passion. So people and talent and teams and leadership. I do a lot of internal trainings at Google for teams around issues like this, culture and vision and collaboration and so on. I also do some work for Google for startups. So I support venture companies that Google supports and invests in. And I also do some work with the Singapore government and one of the local universities as well. So this is kind of my area of interest and passion, as I said. So I'll be sharing best practices and some of my personal observations today. So this is the rough agenda. We're going to talk a bit about vision, and vision is often something that people, maybe have a rough idea of. They have some difficulty articulating it. It can get very confusing between what is vision, what is mission, what is purpose, what is strategy, etc. And this applies at a company level and also at a team level. So we're going to look at really the elements of a vision and why it's important and the advantages of having that aligned across your organization. The next thing we'll talk about will be culture. And Google has actually done a lot of research into what makes an effective team. And what we discovered is essentially how the team works together is the most important thing. So that's even more important than who is on the team. And it's not to say who is on the team doesn't matter. Of course, we're very careful about who we recruit, and you should be too. But we're going to look at the attributes of highly effective teams and talk about some ways that you can maximize the effectiveness of your teams. I'll be sharing some resources at the end as well, with more detailed templates and checklists and so on. And then the last part we'll look at, which really kind of flow into each other, is a manager's role and actions in a crisis. So whether you're the business owner or on the executive team or a leader, manager, even if you're an individual contributor, there are things that you can do in a crisis. We're going to focus specifically on things that managers can do. But there are certain things you can do in terms of how you communicate and how you look after your team and look after your colleagues, and really how you look for ways that you can potentially even strengthen your culture, even though the current climate is very difficult for companies, but it is possible to actually come out a little stronger at the end. And then, as I said, the last part, I will share some resources that you can go to afterwards and hopefully download some of these things and turn them into action. Okay, so first, vision. So the way we think about vision at Google is it's everything really that drives our work. So that means that the core values, and this can be of a company, it can be of a division or a team. The purpose and the mission and strategy are all part of our vision. And aligning on a vision is very important regardless of the size of your business, because it can provide clarity around direction. So people like to feel that they are moving towards something or progressing towards something. Progress is a very big motivator for people. So to see some kind of North Star or some vision of where we are going is quite empowering and motivating for people. You'll notice that some organizations are very good at articulating a vision or maybe elements of a vision like mission or values or purpose. And examples of this would be in some countries, for instance, the military, where they are able to, they usually don't pay particularly well, but they're able to maybe even recruit from top business schools or recruit people who have a lot of other career options, because this sense of purpose, sense of mission, vision around, defending their country or the camaraderie and the power of the mission makes them able to attract top talent. You see it also with some NGOs and NPOs where they have a very powerful mission around we're going to alleviate poverty, or we're going to support women, or we're going to change the world, or improve the environment. And again, they're often able to attract really great talent by articulating this in a powerful way. People like to be part of something that's bigger than them. And honestly, from my observation of SMEs around the world, they're often not as strong at articulating this vision internally and externally. And the irony is that you take venture companies, which sometimes maybe do not have revenue, or they're losing money, or that maybe they don't even have a product yet, or customers yet, but they're often very good at telling the story and talking about how they're going to change the world or change the industry. And that allows them to attract great talent. Whereas SMEs, although they often do have a track record and a great history and products and revenue and so on, for whatever reason are maybe not as strong at doing that. So I think it's very important to do that. It also helps you set stretch goals and aspirational goals. So it helps you get employees to think about the big picture and sort of think about what we call in Google 10x or moonshot thinking, like really big goals. And funnily enough, it's often easier in a way to get people excited about a really big goal compared with a very incremental goal where you're talking about, well, let's do 10% more this year. But something big can actually motivate them even more. It also helps managers in allocating resources sometimes. So you can kind of take a step back if it's a very confusing, nuanced area or there's no clear choice of what to do. Taking a step back and thinking, well, let's go back to what is our vision? Where are we trying to get to? And therefore, it doesn't make sense to invest in this or make that decision. So this is the framework that we use at Google to think about vision. And you'll see at the top left, core values. And I heard a great quote from somebody where they said, how you build culture is by hiring people with certain values. So that's an example of how values really come to life. If you know what your values are, which are your principles, your deeply held beliefs, and if you hire people, even though you may not be doing a lot of hiring right now, but when you are hiring people, if you hire people with that in mind, and also when you think about assigning work or promoting people, or when you're talking to your teams, to reference values and show how values are being brought to life. And sometimes people think this is very abstract, but actually your organization or your team always does have values in reality. The values may be that we are, collaborative, or there may be a value that you don't want or you're not really aware of, like we are very risk averse or something. So the values actually do exist. The thing about them is they have to be brought to life. So as an example, a lot of companies will have posters on the wall of these are our 5 values or these are our 3 values. But unless they're tested, it's very hard to know whether that is true or not. So an example would be if you say your company or your team is very collaborative and supportive of each other and one team and so on, what happens on a Friday night if somebody needs to finish a project and they're struggling, and they won't get it done? Would someone else volunteer to stay back and give up their time to help that person, or would they not? So if nobody would help, you have to question is how collaborative or supportive a team environment it really is. So the testing of it is very important. Now, purpose is usually pretty simple. It doesn't have to be very compelling or exciting or aspirational. It's really just why the organization or why the team exists. And a great way of defining that is what would happen if the team wasn't there. Mission, on the other hand, you do want it to be a little more aspirational, a little bit more exciting, more forward-looking. So this is a statement that articulates a clear, compelling goal that you're striving to achieve. And I'm going to share the Google versions of these in a second. And then you get down to strategy, which are how you plan to go about achieving your mission. And you get down into your goals or OKRs, KPIs, or whatever, which are kind of the specific plans for accomplishing your strategy. And if you look at how this plays out at Google, so our values, which are really sort of the pillars of our culture, are what we call the 3 respects. So these are respecting the user, respecting the opportunity, and respecting each other. And just to expand a little on that, respecting the user, because we have billions of users. Almost anyone with a computer or internet can use some Google product. So we want to be respectful of that. Respect the opportunity, meaning we're a large company with a lot of resources, a lot of touch points. So we want to be very mindful of our responsibility there. And then respecting each other is the internal picture. So how we work together as teams. Are we being inclusive? Are we being respectful? Are we communicating with each other the right way? Now, purpose, generally Google articulates purpose in not so much about, certain kinds of products or industry spaces or revenue or so on. It's more about improving the lives of as many people as possible, which sounds very sort of high level, but, we've always thought about making something that is useful. And then if it's useful to people, then the customer attention and the business success and so on will kind of flow on from that. So that's our purpose. And mission is organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So you'll notice that is very aspirational and stretch, because the world's information is infinite basically, and making it universally accessible and useful is a never-ending task. But at the same time, it is something that we actually do in reality. So it's not completely detached from the real world. We actually are organizing the world's information. We are making it accessible. We are making it useful to people. So it strikes that balance between being sort of practical and realistic, but also being aspirational. And then you get down to which I won't go into here, but the strategy and the goals. So a very important thing about this is to ask yourself, first of all, are you aware of these? Are you able to articulate these? And would that also be true of the rest of your leadership and management team and of your employees as well? And it really shouldn't be just, a poster beside the photocopier or whatever. It should be something that is frequently touched on. So when you do your all hands meeting or your annual plan or any chance where your fireside chat, anytime you're getting people together, that you actually touch on these things and go back to these things. It also is something that getting the team members involved in is a good idea. So if you don't have this in place, you might want to actually involve managers or team members in developing it. So develop, what are our values? What is our mission statement? People will feel much more ownership if they do that. And if it does exist, what you can do is revisit it occasionally. So say, this is our stated mission, or these are our stated values. Are we really bringing this to life? And if not, how could we do better at bringing this to life? And it sounds like, maybe a very sort of abstract kind of exercise, but again, people do like to belong to something larger than themselves. They do like to be part of something that has a big goal or a big mission, or is doing something really meaningful. So I would say don't underestimate the value of this kind of stuff in terms of attracting great talent, retaining great talent, and motivating employees to sort of go that extra mile as well. Okay, so that's a bit about vision. I want to talk next for a few minutes about team culture. So Google has done a lot of research on effective teams. And we had our group go around and look at all kinds of different teams, so sales teams, general and administrative teams, engineering teams, and they used a wide range of measures in terms of assessing effectiveness. So for example, with sales teams, they looked at revenue achievement and achievement of sales goals and targets. With other teams, they looked at, say, product rollouts, productivity, people's perception of how effective the team was. So it was a very holistic measure. And we found that, effective teams actually do outperform, no surprise, but they outperform kind of whatever measure you take. So whether it's revenue achievement for sales teams or, product rollouts for engineering teams, they actually do far exceed kind of the average. And these were the 5 attributes. So psychological safety essentially means that team members feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. This is the most important attribute of an effective team. It's also easily misunderstood. So sometimes people think it means I'm not worried about my job security, or I'm not worried about achieving my goals. I can coast, I can sort of take it easy. It doesn't mean that at all. So psychological safety means that you will bring your whole self to work. And that means that you would ask for help in a timely way, so not leave it too late. So you'd ask for help. If you have made a mistake, you would flag that early. So rather than trying to sort of conceal it or hope it goes away, or blame someone else, you would kind of take responsibility and bring this up early. It also means that you would feel that you can throw out ideas. So even kind of crazy ideas, why don't we try something, or have we ever considered something? You would actually feel safe to do that without worrying about kind of being ridiculed or being shot down immediately. And it's very subtle how these kind of things can happen. So for example, if you have a team meeting and someone, contributes an idea, and then people sort of roll their eyes or look at their watch or groan or something, that sends a very clear message that that person will not feel safe next time to throw out ideas, even if it turns out to be a great idea. So that's an example of the kind of opportunity to create more psychological safety, where at least you would hear the person through, or if you don't have time for that, you would create time later on to listen to their idea, and you may end up rejecting it, of course. But the point is to encourage people to put those ideas and asks for help and admission of mistakes and so on out there. And in the wider world, so even outside of the corporate environment, psychological safety is a very important concept. And there have actually been a lot of disasters caused by lack of psychological safety in teams. So one frequently cited example is in airline safety, where quite a lot of crashes, psychological safety was a big contributing factor, because the most senior person in the cockpit crew, which is the captain, had decided something. We will take off now, or let's go this way, or let's land, or whatever it may be. And there was evidence that the less senior members of the crew knew this was a dangerous decision, but either they did not challenge the captain at all, or they challenged very, very timidly. And you can understand the reasons why. They might fear, well, what if I'm wrong? He or she is the captain, they should know better than me. Or they may think, well, this is career damaging. I don't want to argue with the captain. Or they're not going to want to fly with me again, or whatever it may be. Or just embarrassment, maybe humiliation. People can be afraid of that too. But it ended up with catastrophic results, where actually the plane crashed and everybody died. You see it also in situations, medical situations, where maybe you have a star surgeon, and the other doctors or nurses would find it very difficult to challenge something they say, or challenge a decision, or in military situations, for example. So psychological safety really is the foundational one. And you have to remember, people don't immediately have it. So people need to get to know each other, and open up and be a bit vulnerable before they could trust each other. And then they will start to, as they work together, they may have positive or negative experiences. So negative experience could damage psychological safety, but you need to start by allowing people to get to know each other. And there's lots of exercises out there. There's a very simple one called life paths, for example, where you just get everybody on a team together and have them take 10 minutes and draw, pictorially draw their life story on a piece of paper, and then share it, talk through it for 5 minutes with everyone in the room. And it's amazing, even people who have worked together as colleagues for years will get to know each other much better. And there's various other psychological tests and tests of strengths and so on, that you can do to help people get to know each other better. But yeah, so psychological safety is the most important, and I'll share some resources on that. And then you have the other, so dependability, meaning team members get things done on time and meet the right quality bar in their work. So for example, if you say, give me the report by Friday, and then Friday comes around and you don't get it, and then Monday you have to chase the person, or it's not done to the right quality level, then you have a dependability challenge. And that is something that you want to work on. And of course, a lot of these go back to psychological safety. How easy is it for people to be demanding to each other, to demand accountability, or to call out an issue, or to sort of say, I expect better, or I expect more. And then you get to structure and clarity. Honestly speaking, Google Teams don't always score super high on structure and clarity because we have a very high tolerance for ambiguity and change and going one way and then going another way. But you want to make sure that the team has enough clarity around roles and responsibilities, plans, goals, etc. If the team is already very dependable, you don't necessarily need to put in more structure and clarity because they already know what to do and they're getting it done. But if the team is not dependable, that's a situation you want to put in more clarity around plans, goals, responsibilities, roles, etc. And then the last two are very personal to team members, meaning and impact. But they're important because for most people, certainly for most top talent, if they don't have a good sense of meaning in their job and a good sense of impact in their job, they will often tend to look for that somewhere else. And eventually they may move to a different group or a different company. So meaning means the work is personally important to me. It's different from impact. Impact means that you understand that the work is having an impact and creating change. So, for example, a person may have a high sense of meaning but a low sense of impact. If I love art and I work in an art gallery and only 2 or 3 people come into the art gallery every day, I know I'm not having a lot of impact, but the job might be very meaningful to me because I love to be around the artists and the exhibitions and I can read my art books and so on. So it's meaningful even though there isn't a huge sense of impact. You can have the opposite situation too, which is a high sense of impact but a low sense of meaning. You will often find this with well, I won't say often. Sometimes you'll find this with very high-performing salespeople, for example. So they understand the impact of their work. They understand they're always top of the sales ranking and they're keeping the team afloat and the customers love them and so on. But they might not have a very high sense of meaning. So they might actually want to be doing something else. They wish they were, a travel writer or operating a cafe or playing in a rock band or something. So again, you won't always know what people are thinking about meaning and impact, but you want to in your career conversations, when you do performance reviews, maybe in your one-on-one now and again, find out what people are feeling about this. So you'll be able to measure these attributes at different stages. Psychological safety, it affects you all the time. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The higher the psychological safety is, the more your team is bringing their whole self to work. So the more you're getting out of them. If you don't have high psychological safety in the team, the more they're holding back on ideas, requests for help, admission of mistakes. Dependability, you will notice it anytime you have a deadline or a milestone. Structure and clarity, you will typically talk about it when you do your annual planning or your quarterly business review, or you're talking about relationships with partner companies or other teams. And then, as I said, the last two, because they're individual, the only way to find out about them is actually talking to your team members one-on-one. And if you have trouble getting feedback from team members, it's good to make them realize that it's a duty, it's a responsibility for them to share with you. So one trick is to say, it disappoints me a little that I'm not getting more feedback from you. I really value your opinion, or you've been here a while, or you're an expert in your field. I think you have great ideas. I'd love to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and even extend that to how motivated they are and how satisfied they are in their role. You don't want to have one-on-one conversations where a lot is being left unsaid. You want to have it kind of all come out in your conversations. So I will share a resource at the end that has more checklists and templates and so on, but some very basic psychological safety best practices. And remember, psychological safety is the most important one and the foundational one. So whenever you have a meeting or a conversation with your teams, be present, ask questions, be aware of body language, avoid blaming people, focus on the solutions. So mistakes happen, but try to stay away from kind of finger pointing mode, and try and have the team think how we can get better as a team rather than kind of fall into factions of, this works well, but if only he didn't do that, then everything would be good. Know each other's, as much as you can, know each other's work styles and preferences. as well. So we all have, of course, different personality types, introversion, extroversion, etc. We are often set up to have conflict in teams very easily. So an example would be if you have somebody who's very action and decision oriented, and you have another person who's very analytical and focused on data and concepts. Those two people, and I'm not talking about job role, I'm talking about personality type. Those two people can very easily have conflict because the very action-oriented person might come to them, just grab them at the corridor and say, "Oh, I need to make a decision on that today. So what do you think? Yay or nay?" And that will really stress out a person who's very focused on analysis and data. They will say, "Whoa, wait, hold on, why are we doing this? And I don't have the data yet, and please don't rush me," and so on. So you can imagine how they will perceive each other. From the decisive person's perspective, the analytic person seems very sort of wishy-washy and indecisive and kind of procrastinating. But from the analytical person's perspective, the action-oriented person seems very sort of rash and impulsive and almost dangerous. So it is possible, if these two understand each other's styles and have some self-awareness, they actually could learn to work together more effectively. The very decisive person could try to give more advanced time and more of a heads up to the analytical person. And the analytical person could recognize, we won't always have all the time or all the data we need to make a decision. So I understand in these situations, we're going to just have to make the best decision given the constraints, So the point I'm making is that having as much awareness as you can about each other's styles, communication preferences, etc., will really help. Another example is when you want feedback on something. Some people are very open to sharing feedback live in a large group. So they have no problem standing up and saying, "I don't think we should do this," and why haven't we considered? And you'll have other kind of personality types who may have fantastic ideas, but they are just not comfortable in that kind of forum. So you could share a document with them, for example, in advance, and allow them to add comments to it or find other ways to kind of draw them out. So yeah, this awareness of each other's styles is very important. Be inclusive in decision-making. So as much as you can, solicit input and feedback. There's a big difference in you going into a room as a leader and saying, "We have this issue we need to solve, and I think what we need to do is something," without giving people a chance to give any feedback. Okay, so it's a little bit better if you said, "We have this issue to solve, and I think we should do something, but I'd like to hear from all of you guys." So that's a little bit better because at least they have a chance to speak up. But the problem is they have to argue with your solution. So the best thing you could do, I think, is say, "We have this issue we need to solve, and I have some thoughts about the best thing we could do, but I would like to hear from all of you guys first," and maybe sort of go around the room. And then at the end, you as a leader, you'll probably have to make the decision, but at least you'll have heard from everyone, and they won't have to argue with you with the solution that you have offered. So there's a lot of little tricks like this that can really influence the work culture and the team culture. And yeah, also to discuss failures quite openly as learnings. I mean, actually, we all have failures, and all teams and all businesses have failures. Google has had many failures over the years in terms of products and so on. So you'll notice that we try not to have a culture of kind of punishing people and firing people because they tried something that didn't work out. If you do that, you're essentially punishing experimentation and innovation. A lot of new things are going to fail anyway. So as much as possible, take a failure and then look at the learnings from that and have people commit to doing better next time. So if you have a repeated failure for the same reasons, you probably have an issue. Or if you have ethical failure where people are doing something really dishonest or unethical, that's different. But I'm talking about intelligent failure, noble failure, well-intentioned failure. Okay, so I'm going to move on. And as I said, I will share more resources on that at the end. I'm going to move on quickly to a manager's role. So I won't go through all of these in detail, but essentially, a manager's role can be divided into people-oriented and task-oriented. So if you look at what's on the left column here, this is the people-oriented part. So you want to create an inclusive team environment, as we just talked about. You want to show concern for people's success and their well-being. It doesn't mean you have to handhold them in everything. I mean, their career development is their responsibility, but it means that you want to show concern for that, give them feedback, give them ideas. Empower the team, not micromanage them. So people are always somewhere on the skill-will quadrant. So they may be, if they're new to the job, for example, they'll probably be lower skill but higher will. So they don't know how to do everything, but they have, a lot of energy and enthusiasm. At that point, you do want to manage them in a more hands-on way. But if you have somebody who's a high performer and is very capable and dependable, obviously you don't want to be micromanaging them. But you may need to think about how to keep them motivated so that they don't become sort of burnt out or cynical in the role. You want to give them new responsibilities, or maybe have them train other people, or think about moving on to a different team or different role. Of course, support the career development, give them feedback on their performance. When you're giving feedback, don't make it a personal attack. So always talk about the situation, the behavior, and the impact. So for example, if somebody is always late to a meeting, rather than say, you're always late and I don't understand how hard it is to be on time and why are you so disorganized and so on, that's really an attack on somebody's character. And although your frustration might be understandable, it's very hard to have a good conversation then, because they feel personally attacked and they become very defensive usually. But if you said something like, on Tuesday, you were late to our team meeting again, and we weren't able to include your opinions in the discussion, or we weren't able to all align as easily as we could have. So going forward, I'd appreciate if you can be on time for these meetings. They're really important use of everybody's time. So that's different, because it's an action that is being criticized rather than the person's character. Also be a good coach. Of course, always ask people, if you have a one-on-one, which hopefully you do with your teams, make sure that you have some structure to that. So don't just say, how are you doing? How are things going? It's good to be informal when you know the person, but it's very easy then to fail to address important things because you always just go off in a random direction. So having a bit of structure, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's top of mind? What are you worried about right now? What feedback do you have from me as your boss? What are we not talking about that we should be talking about? Have some kind of structure that will draw out the sensitive or difficult topics. And then as much as you can, also share information with your team. Sometimes people ask, I have this challenge, or I'm worried about our finances, or, there's something, I don't know how much I should share with the team. And I think the best policy is to share information that is actionable by them. So for example, if you have a meeting with the bank tomorrow and you're not sure how it's going to go, it might be making you very anxious and really important to you and top of mind. But if you share that with the team, there's really nothing they can do about it. So in a sense, you would just be giving them anxiety, with no return on that. But if you were to say, if we can hit a certain milestone by the end of this month, it's really going to help our efforts, which could be financing or other things, then that is something that they can act on. They can make an extra push. They can really think about the company's success and growth and drive things a bit harder. So I would say, focus your sharing on things that they can actually do something about. And then the right-hand side here is really the task-oriented piece. So this is about having the right, vision, strategy, structure, being demanding about results and productivity. And remember, there's no conflict between psychological safety and performance or productivity. As we talked about from Google's research, they actually go together. So the more psychologically safe your team is, the more productive and more high-performing they will be. Collaborate, here it says across Google, but collaborate with other teams or with other, whatever external partners that you have. You do have to be a strong decision maker as a leader in the end. There's often no one to make the decision but you, so you have to not shy away from that too much. And then have the skills to help advise the team. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be an engineer, a marketer, a salesperson, an accountant, but it means you at least need to know what they are doing and have some appreciation for the challenges of the role and the things that are likely top of mind for them. The key thing with all of this is you need, as a leader or manager, to pivot between these all the time. So it's not that people, or the people part is more important or the task part is more important. They're both really important. What you will notice on your calendar is a lot of your calendar is probably taken up by tasks, because these tend to be the urgent things. So it might be have a meeting with the bank, customer discussion, solve the quality issue, meet with the vendor. These are all immediate things that demand your attention, and that's okay. But what you can find yourself doing is neglecting the team part. So you might feel, I really need to talk to him about his performance, or I'm not sure she's really a cultural fit with our company, or I wish our team culture was more creative, or took more ownership, or more responsible, more risk-taking, more dynamic, whatever. But it's very easy to postpone those things and say, well, I'll deal with that, after we've closed out the quarter, or I'll deal with that in the new year, or I'll deal with that. And sometimes the longer you push these things out, the greater the cost becomes. So if you tolerate low performance for a long time, that's a cost to you. And in fact, it's negative for the rest of the team too. It can have a toxic influence, because people see, oh, this person is still a manager here, or this person is still working here, even though they do nothing. So it's that kind of company, or, if there's a chance to improve the culture of your team, the sooner you can do that, the sooner you'll start getting great results. So, but it's very easy to say, oh, I'll deal with that later on. So the important thing here is just to know when to pivot between task and people focus, or team focus, and to build time into your calendar as well. So build some time in each week to think about the team, think about the culture, think about the talent you have in the company, so that your whole calendar doesn't get filled out all the time with urgent tasks. And there's some specific things you can do in a crisis as well. So on the right-hand side, I've taken some of the sort of communications or announcements that come out from our CEO at Google. And this is, a certain amount of them are released, excuse me, externally. Others are internal only. But we're constantly communicating about how we're looking after our employees, what we're doing for the community, how we're supporting business, how we're partnering with the government, whatever it may be. So, the point here is that even in a crisis like now, where your business may be hurting and your revenue may be hurting, and you may have a lot of concerns about sustainability and continuity, if you can get through this, it's still possible to come out with a stronger culture. And employees, when they feel anxious and worried about their jobs and worried about the economy and everything else, it's really a time to invest in them and invest in the culture, because people want to feel cared for. And if they see the company doing something also, now of course, if you're a very small company, there's less you can do maybe than a very large company, but you can still do things for the community. What are you doing to support the community? It could be volunteer hours. It could be some sort of financial donation. It could be discounts to people. It could be, something creative like that. If employees see you trying to help the larger crisis that's going on, that will make them feel more, feel closer to the company, really, and to the culture of the company, to the leadership of the company. So these are a few things you can do. One is over-communicate, be transparent, constantly show your concern for employees, show you're doing whatever you can for them in the current environment. And remember that, profits will come from your product or your service, but behind all that is people. So every success, every failure is going to come from your people. Engage the community, as I said, whatever thing you can do, volunteering, discounts, some kind of new tie-up or collaboration or contribution. Just don't let the whole current crisis pass without the company ever having kind of taken a stand and tried to do something, even if it's small. Keep people focused on the larger goals. This crisis will pass, as they say, keep calm and carry on. Show empathy for people. So we will often have meetings in Google which are really just no agenda, just to hang out together as a team virtually. So people might talk about what's stressing them out at the moment, or we might get parents together and they'll talk about the challenge of parenting in the current environment, and remote schooling and everyone at home and all those kind of things. And on the surface, these have nothing to do with business or sales. But actually they do, because again, employees want to feel that the company cares. They want to feel connected. They want to feel part of something. So it actually can and does impact their motivation level, their engagement level, their productivity. And we will also try to humanize the situation, even with humor. Sometimes people will make funny videos about their work from home life, or the challenges of how much weight they've put on from ordering in food all the time, or whatever it may be. But just something that kind of humanizes leadership and humanizes each other and the whole situation. And as I said at the end, then also just to have a sense of opportunity, which sounds crazy in such a difficult environment, but a crisis is actually a test. It's a test for the company. Can it survive? It's a test for the leadership as well. And if you demonstrate great values and behavior during a crisis, it can actually make the team much more motivated and engaged and loyal. So if you do come through the crisis at the end, you actually might find that your culture is stronger than it was before. And in a sense, the company is stronger than it was before. And I will share a resource at the end where you can see our public blog, which actually gives examples of these kind of communications as well. And I just share them because I think they strike a nice tone, and that may be something that you want to use when communicating with your teams or with colleagues. So these are some resources. So Rework is a free Google HR tool site. So what that means is even if you just Google Rework, you'll find it. But that has a lot of templates, checklists, resources, tools, etc. that you can use. They're all free and maybe customized for your own company. And these would deal with things that I addressed earlier, like managers and vision and culture and hiring and all those sort of things. We have a public access blog you can take a look at. There's a couple other resources there, Think with Google and Grow with Google and Google Primer. And then lastly, I share my own contact information as well, kerryoshea@google.com. So if you have any specific question, feel free to reach out to me. There will also be space there to add questions if you have any, and we will try to get back to you if you add anything there. Okay, thank you everyone for your engagement today. I know it's a little harder when it's not a live session, but I really appreciate your interest. I would encourage you to fill in the feedback form, and also you can opt in for a live Q&A session, so please do that if you can. Once again, thank you very much for your engagement. Good luck.